All right, cool. So, so there are a few of you who currently work in tech, right?
Yes.
Okay, so can you tell me kind of what your, let's say what your basic workflow looks like in terms of, you know, I show up to work and I start doing, you just show up to work and then you just start like doing whatever you want. How does that work?
Check email, do tickets.
Okay, tickets. So let's talk about tickets. So how do you get a ticket?
Usually have a website they use, like we use like ServiceNow or Remedy, and you check your group's ticket, see if there's any tickets assigned to you or to your group, and then just take them from there. That's what I do.
Okay. So how do the tickets get created?
Some are automated. A lot of them are automated. Some are like specific users that put in a ticket for work, so we can do our side of the stuff.
Okay, so it's like a someone has a problem with something and then they submit a ticket and then you fix it.
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right, so I'm kind of thinking about something slightly different. So as a software developer, yeah, so that kind of mechanism is similar, but what the actual planning process for software development typically follows what's called an Agile framework. And an Agile framework is a way of kind of planning things out and executing them, basically. So the traditional way of designing a piece of software. So if you have parents or anything who worked in software, or if you talk to older people, like my father-in-law is a software developer. The process was something like you get a contract or something, right? You get like a contract and there are a whole bunch of requirements in the contract. So you get like a notebook full of just requirements, like this is what we wanted to do, these are the specs and so on. And you get that book and then engineers start planning things out. They start planning and designing. It takes a few months. Eventually they come up with basically like a design proposal. And then people start implementing that, right? So people start writing code that match those specs. And that takes another few months. And then after that, there's like a testing phase. So you take all the code you've written and then you write some tests and you just try to like debug and so on. And then that takes a few months. And then after that, then you have something that you can deliver. You have a final product. And that can take a year or 2 years or whatever. It's typically a long process. And over that time period, things can change. Maybe the requirements change, or the people who've commissioned you realize, oh, we don't actually want it like this, we want it like that. And then if you want to make any changes, then you kind of have to go all the way back to the beginning and go through the whole process all over again. So it ends up not being very flexible. So one solution to that, or one kind of the standard solution to that in current software engineering, is to use something called Agile, which follows the same basic pattern of, you plan, you write stuff, you test, and you deliver, but it shortens that time frame into very rapid cycles. So typically that cycle, instead of being a year long, will be 2 weeks. So 2 weeks is a standard kind of unit of time in software development, and that's called a sprint. So what happens is every 2 weeks, you'll kind of have a planning meeting. So everyone on your team will have a planning meeting, and you'll talk about, okay, what do we want to get done? Basically, what are our goals for this sprint? So you'll take those larger goals, and then you'll break them down into what are called stories. So stories or tasks or tickets or whatever. And those stories are what a given individual developer will work on. So let's say we want to, we want to add a new feature during the sprint. So we're going to chop up that task into a whole bunch of smaller subtasks that we can farm out to different people, and everyone's going to work on them. And hopefully by the end of the sprint, everyone will be done. So when you get a ticket or a task or a story, typically the length of time, or basically the difficulty of the task or the length of time that the task will take is measured in points. And a point is basically a day's worth of work. So a sprint is 2 weeks, and you'll get some tasks or stories, and those stories will be measured in points. So if I get a story that's 5 points, that means it should take, an average developer five days to complete. So we're going to kind of go through a scenario where we have something similar. So we have a story. You're a software developer, and your team is developing whatever, some larger project, and you need to contribute to that. So you need to write a class that has some of this basic functionality. Okay, so the task is write a class that gets a user's budget, and gets a user's destination based on the budget, and displays a confirmation message to the user. So those are the requirements. And in the real world, oftentimes you don't get clear requirements, or the requirements are wrong or don't make sense. And so your first task, anytime you get assigned something, is to figure out exactly what it is you're supposed to be doing. And oftentimes that's the hardest part. So let's go ahead, and we have our task. So let's do some planning, and then we're gonna execute our plan and actually code this up. Okay, so again, we have this travel package app. We need to write a class that gets a user's budget, that gets a user's destination based on the budget, and displays a confirmation message to the user. So we can ask some basic questions. Things like, what data do we need? Where does our data belong? What methods do we need? And what do our methods do? So since we're writing a class, we know that a class basically has, it's kind of a container for two different kinds of things, for data and for actions or methods. So we can start writing this up. And this is a plan, so it's subject to change. So what do we think about data?
We'll need the user's budget, so an amount.
Okay, so we're gonna need, yeah. So that will be, so we'll need the budget. What other data do we need?
You're gonna need some sort of like destination data, like how much it costs for each destination.
Okay. Yeah, okay, good. Anything else? Okay. So let's think about, yeah, let's move on to this. So where does our data belong? So this question is basically asking where in the class should these pieces of data go?
If we want the budget to persist, maybe we want that, like we were talking earlier in the week, with the CSV file.
Okay, so we could, okay, so that's a good So we could, for example, if we were writing like a web application where we had users with accounts, we would probably want to save that information, right? So you almost always want to save whatever data you can get from people. So yeah, if someone enters a budget and they have an account, you can associate that budget with an account. So I would say that, yeah, just to keep it simple for now, let's just say that the information we get is going to be ephemeral. So we won't save it. We won't persist it. We won't save it to a database or to a CSV file.
The budget will be an instance variable because it'll be based on the user.
Right. So so a budget would be an instance variable because why? Can you talk a little more about that?
It'll be different per user,
Right.
per instance.
Okay. So if we create an instance, then yeah, we'll presumably have a different user for each instance, which could have a different budget. So that's not something that's going to be universal to every instance. All right, so let's make that instance variable. And what about this destination or cost info?
That's gonna be
In the same,
user, or are we gonna have like an array and an object of destinations to choose from?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Yeah, what exactly is that data going to be? Where is it going to come from? What are we going to do with it?
that should probably be saved as a class variable. That way it could be updated for all the instances if the data changes.
Okay. Okay, so you want this to be a class variable because it's going to be presumably the same for every instance.
Somebody not on mute.
Someone's
Yeah,
probably-
we could either make it a class variable and make it an object for the choose from the cost and the budget.
Okay, so let's do, yeah, Everett, can you mute?
Sorry.
As much as I appreciate the guitar. Okay, so let's double back now, and we have like the data. What exactly, what data type is budget going to be? We're kind of dancing around this.
Float.
A float, okay, could be a float. Yeah, so it could be a few different things. Typically with currency, you want to be since floats are not totally precise, you might want to use an int instead or some other data type which is more precise. But yeah, so some kind of integer float or something. What about this destination or cost info?
I'm thinking key value pairs, destination and the cost of it.
Okay, that makes sense to me. So we have dest something, and then we have, let's say, whatever, something like this. Okay. Okay, so an entry could be a dictionary. So what data type would this be then, or could it be?
That seems like
Dictionary.
Sorry?
that the easiest would be like someone said earlier, to store it in a CSV file. And then we can access it and turn it into dictionaries as we need it.
Okay, so yeah, so that's a good question. So again, if this were like a task that you were getting, the first question you might want to ask is, where am I getting this information from? Right? So that's not something that you can probably just decide on your own. It probably exists somewhere else. So let's say that there's another team that works on, there's another team somewhere that is going to supply you a CSV file with this information. But so we know we're going to get it from a CSV file. We can just mark that here. We don't have any control over this file. We're just going to get it from somewhere. And let's say let's make a CSV file. Okay, so here is our here's the data that we're getting from the other teams. This is the CSV file.
We still have to change that into a dictionary, correct?
Well, I mean, that's the question. So what do we want to do with this? We have a dictionary here, but what is the data type of this going to be? We're just going to have one entry? Just a bunch of dictionaries floating around?
A list of dictionaries.
Okay, yeah, so we're going to need some kind of singular container to hold all of this stuff. So we could have a list of dictionaries. We could have one dictionary where, for example, just the key, so this could just be key values, but that's not really ideal because for a couple of reasons, we kind of lose information about what it is. So we want to keep something like this where we have destination and cost, so we know what these things mean. So yeah, I think probably a list of dictionaries. So now we know, so, as we're working on this problem, initially it was just, we started with some assumptions and now we have a lot clearer picture. So we know we're asking questions and we know that we're going to get this information from a CSV. We know what the CSV is going to look like. So now we've decided on how we're going to, format this data to use in our class. Okay. So our destination cost info is going to be a list of dictionaries. So where does this data belong? I think someone already suggested that this could be a class variable. So that makes sense to me. So let's go with that for now. All right, so what about our methods? What kind of methods do we need?
Get budget.
method-
user.
We'll need one to handle accessing the CSV file to
Okay.
extract the dictionaries.
Okay, what other methods?
Input.
Getting the user's budget.
Okay, let's see. Yeah. All right.
Get user destination.
Okay. Get user destination. So when you get users, we're gonna read all of the, all of our basic data that we need from a file. We're gonna get the user's budget. And we're gonna get the user's destination.
And we could do a method to print all the information to the screen.
Okay. Print. So it's a confirmation. Okay, so someone, let me have to pick on someone. Let's see, Stephanie. So can you kind of compare what we have so far with our methods to what our requirements are? Stephanie, are you there? Okay. I'm gonna call on.
She wrote in the chat.
How's that?
She wrote in the chat. She said,
She said 1 second.
Okay, sorry.
Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
There we go. Sorry. So are you looking for what, just to clarify what your requirements are of me, you're
Yeah.
looking for what methods satisfy which requirements?
Yeah, or so I guess I'm the larger question is, are we done here? So if we compare everything we need to do in our requirements with the methods that we have, do you think we have enough methods here?
Yes.
Okay.
If you look at the exact methods of what's there based on the exact requirements, but I would say that if you have a destination of, if you have you might need a way to handle if there are multiple destinations that are within a user's budget as to how that's handled.
Okay, good. Yeah, exactly. So what we have now is we're reading from a file, we're getting the user's budget. Let's say my budget is $1,300, and then get user destination. Well, if I have $1,300 and I say I want to go to France, well, that's not going to work. So we somehow have to filter the available options down to what's within the user's budget. So we can't simply get the budget and then get the user's destination. That's a little, so that matches the requirements explicitly, but there's something in between the lines that we have to
compare.
Figure out. Yeah. So we'll say, something like filter or compare. These are long method names, but right. So filter destinations based on budget. So we're going to read from a file. So we're going to get all of our country cost information. We're going to get the user's budget. Hey, I have $1,300 to spend. And we're going to filter the destinations based on budget, which is just going to be Colombia and Japan. And then we're going to get the user's destination. So the user will get to choose from available options. And then we'll print a confirmation message. So I think that's probably good enough. We can, fill in the blanks as we need to. That's probably good enough for now. So let's kind of go over in detail what each of these methods is going to do.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
If we're going to be filtering the destinations, which is a class variable, will we want to store the filtered list in like an instance variable?
Sure, yeah, we could definitely do that. So that's a good point. So we're basically gonna end up with another piece of data, right? So we're gonna start out with this master list of everything, and we're gonna end up with some subset of this list. So what do we do with that subset? What are our options in terms of?
Allow the user to select one, right?
Yes, we want to allow the user to select one, but if we're answering this question, where does our data belong? What are our three options?
Class variable, instance variable, or block scope variable?
Yeah, so yeah, class, instance, or local, or So if we have a subset of countries and costs, should that be a class variable? Let me ask, let's see, should that be a class variable?
Yeah, we could put it in class because it's just gonna be there, and you just everything could access it from that list.
Okay, so if we have this master list, right, which is which we've decided is a class variable, but then I use it, right? So I use the application and I say I only have $1,200, so I can only go to Japan. So my whatever the filter destinations is just going to be this one. So do I want to store this value? You're saying you want to store this variable as a class variable, correct?
Well, for the filter part.
Yes.
Oh, for the filter part, then well, no, I don't think I want to store it as a class variable. If it's just filtering, I'll probably just store it as a instant variable.
Okay.
Because per person, right?
Right. Yeah.
What if we have multiple people doing it, right? So
yeah. So I would say that we definitely don't want to do class variable, because that's not something, that assumes that every instance of the class or every user is going to have the same budget, right? Which is probably not a good assumption. So I think we can eliminate class variable. So now we have two other options, which is an instance variable or a local variable. So I'm not sure we have enough information right now to make, a good decision, but I think instance variable will be fine. So let's go ahead and add another piece of data. So all right, so let's talk about what this read from file is going to do. We don't have to, this is pseudocode, so I don't need, exact details.
So you'd, let me see if I can articulate this. We have the read from file for the destinations, correct?
Yeah.
So you'd want to, read from destination file and populate. Where did we have the data belong to? The
Dictionary?
Yeah, dictionary.
Country, yeah, country to cost.
We're gonna open the CSV file, and then we're gonna, let's say, convert. So what is our ultimate? What do we want to return from this function?
The
To do.
the destination dictionary of destinations and costs.
Okay. Is this, do we want to return a dictionary?
Just a list.
Yeah, so we want to return a list of dictionaries. Okay, so I think that's good enough for now. So this read from file is going to open the CSV, and it's going to process the data, and it's going to produce a list of dictionaries. All right, so what about this get user budget?
Take input from the user for that, right?
Yeah, so we'll have to yeah, there's a question, how can we do it? If this were a web application, we'd have a form, but let's say this is a command line application. So how do we get user input?
Variable equals input function with the prompt.
Yes.
So
Yeah, so there's an input function. So okay. And then anything else we need to do with this?
Input validation, make sure they're putting a float in, not something else.
Okay.
Store.
What?
We need to store it to the instance variable so we can use it later.
Okay, so we can store. Okay, yeah, we can talk. There might be some more details we need to think about, but let's move on to filter destinations based on budget.
From this, you're going to compare the user budget to, or no, you're going to compare the destination. You're going to look at the user input and compare it. So it's going to be like a if the destination cost is less than or equal to the budget.
Okay, so let's say we will create a subset of, what do we call this thing? Destination cost. You want to think of a better name for that, but based on. So we can talk about implementation details later, but that's basically what we want to do. All right, and then get user destination. So what do we want to do with this value? This subset. So we have filtered destinations, right?
Do we want to present it to the user so they can then select destination?
Okay. So we create it, and then let's say we're going to store it as an instance variable, as we kind of indicated up here. So we've created it, and now we're going to store it as an instance variable, and then get user destination. So we have a method that's going to get the user destination, but we want to make sure that the user destination is something in this filter destinations. So we have a couple options here. We could create a new method that's dedicated to displaying the possible options, or we could kind of wrap that in here. Since this is a very, these are very small methods, I think probably either one would work, but let's just go ahead and let's create a separate method. So okay, so we have a new little helper method there. Let's see. And then get user destination. Who can I call on here? Josh. How should we handle?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, good. Yeah. How should we handle get user destination?
You can use the input function again to have
Okay.
them make their choice off of the filtered list.
Okay. So we're gonna filter all the lists. Let's say I can only afford Japan. I'm gonna get, here are your options, Japan. And then it's gonna say, choose which destination you want. And I type in France.
If we wanted to, we could include the confirmation within this method, or you could have that as a separate method.
Okay. Yeah, so we're gonna want to follow like the pattern. Basically, anytime you get user input, and this applies especially to the web, is you never just want to directly take user input as is. You always want to do some kind of validation or checking just for security and for other reasons. So let's validate. We're going to present them the list of available options. We're going to ask them where they want to go, and then we're going to validate that. Okay. And if at this point, we basically have two paths. We have a success path and a failure path. So we can handle both of those potentially. So our next method is print confirmation message. So I don't want to get too complicated here. We can kind of, we'll worry about this later. So print confirmation message, let's just wrap this up and say, something like that. All right, so we've got quite a bit of stuff now. So we started out with this story, which was, fairly detailed but sparse, and didn't really include everything we need. We had to do a little bit of prodding to figure out what was going on, but so we can get a user's budget, we can get a user's destination based on the budget, and display a confirmation message to the user. We know we're going to need at least kind of a budget, a destination cost list of dictionaries, which we're going to get from a CSV. And then at some point, we're going to need to save the filtered destinations. The budget is going to be instance, because that's going to vary per user or per instance. The destination or cost dictionary should be, at least at this point, let's say stable. So every class will have the same destination cost. And then filter destinations will again be an instance variable because it's dependent on basically the budget. Okay, we're gonna read from a file, we're gonna get the user's budget, we're gonna filter the destinations based on the budget, we're going to display the filtered destinations and then get the user destination. And if it's valid, then we'll print a confirmation message. Okay, so let's take a 5-minute break and we'll come back at 9 and we'll implement this. All right, so we've got our plan going here. So let's go ahead and try and implement it. We'll call this and I'll keep the pseudocode open on the right. All right, so probably let's go ahead and stub this out. I'm just going to go ahead and stub this out real quick. So class we have all of our methods. So we're going to read from file. To get user budget. And filter destinations based on budget. And display filtered destinations. Get user destinations. All right, so we've got our travel package class. We've got it stubbed out with all the methods that we're going to have. So let's take a look at the instance and class. We can go ahead and start filling this stuff in. So we know we're going to have a budget. So self.budget. And are we going to get the budget when we create an instance?
We got to get the user budget first. So
Yeah. So budget meaning user budget, but we'll call it user budget. Okay. So when we create an instance of a travel package class, are we going to have this?
No.
Yes, correct. We're not going to have it. We have to get this dynamically. So we have to ask the user for it. And we ask that actually right here. So we have an issue here where we need to create this value here, which we can do, but oftentimes it's good just for kind of code readability to put all of your instance methods in the init. So any instance methods that you're gonna have, even if you don't create them when at initialization, it's good to have them. So user budget, I'm just gonna say none. So Python is not a statically typed language, so you don't have to do anything particular here, but you can also do something like 0, since user budget is going to be an int or a float, depending on whatever we decided. You could do a dummy value, like whatever would be appropriate, but we'll do 0 for now. I think that's sensible. Okay. So user budget, we're going to need this other instance variable, filtered destinations. We can also do that self.filtered. So what data type is filtered destinations going to be?
List.
Yeah. So we can create an empty list there. Like it's basically just telling whoever reads this that filtered destinations is going to be a list. And then we have this issue, destination cost. So this is going to be a class variable. So this is a little tricky. Does anyone have any ideas for how we can handle this?
Do we have to import it from the CSV?
We do have to import it from the CSV. So we can do that here. So we'll implement that here. But the question is, so we have a, we want this to be a class variable, right? So we could do something like, equals what?
An empty one?
Is what?
Empty brackets?
Okay, we could do this. So it is going to be a list, right? It's going to end up being a list of dictionaries. Does anyone see any problems with this? Like we want this to be a class variable, right?
If we're gonna read the CSV with the read from file method, if it's going to try to, if we were to try to use that to define our class variable, if the class hadn't been initialized yet, then I don't think it would have access to that method.
Right. Yeah. So one issue is that, right. So we have this issue where we want this to be a class variable, but if we implement this in a way that every instance is creating it, then we're recreating the same thing over and over again every time we create an instance.
Would we make another class instead? And then that way it would just call the other class?
We could potentially make another class. So I think that might be a good thing. So I think after Omar's lecture, we might have an exercise where we do something like that. We can use a different class, but for now, let's say we only want to use this class.
We just make that the path to the file location.
We could, but let's see.
Could we make read from file a class method?
Okay. Okay. Good. So this is kind of where we want to go here. Read from file is something that we want to create this, but we only want it to belong to the class, not to every instance. So if it's a class method, we're not going to pass in self, we're going to pass in CLS. So this will be a reference to the class. And then we read from file. You guys have gone over reading CSV files?
Yeah, the last class.
Okay. So can anyone walk me through this or give me some ideas?
You're gonna have to import the CSV first, right?
Okay.
One.
Okay, so now we have access. So where is this coming from? CSV?
It's filled in the Python, but you have to.
Yes, it's from the.
It doesn't load by default, so you have to import it.
Yes, it's from the standard library.
Standard library, that was the.
Yeah, Python standard library. Okay, so we're gonna read this in. So how do we read files? What do
with
we
open?
Yeah, with. So we use this with statement. It creates context, which has enter and exit methods. So it will by default, kind of do certain behavior. So if you have a method that typically does one thing, and then after it does something else, like open a file, then close a file, you can use this and it will handle errors and things like that. So with open, we're going to read this file, destinations.csv. And what mode do we want?
Just read.
Yeah, so we'll read. So that's the default parameter, but doesn't hurt to be explicit. And then we'll give this an alias. So this F will basically be whatever this is, which is going to be like a file object. So we're going to open it and then assign it to this value F. And then we can do so how do we read? So we want to create a list of dictionaries, right?
Do you use a
dictReader.
dictReader?
How's that?
This like CSV.dictReader?
Okay, yeah, good. So we can CSV.dictReader. So this is one of the options. We could also just read it in and then create something ourselves. That's always available. But let's go ahead and let's print. So Python, create an instance here. And read from file. Okay, so we have this dictReader object, and this, may not make a lot of sense. This is just, the default Python representation of something. So we know that this belongs to, this is a class, right? It's a dictReader object. Object in this sense means instance. So this is an instance of the dictReader class. So we're creating an instance of the dictReader class. And if we iterate over it, we'll see that it's a bunch of dictionaries. So we can do that real quick. So for we have our dictionaries, but we don't want dictionaries. We want a list of dictionaries. So I will just, yeah, so a few ways to do this.
Append that to the desk dict list.
So you're breaking up?
We could just do for row and contents, desk dict.append.
Yes. Yeah, we could definitely do that. I'm gonna do this with a list comprehension though. So we could do and then let's print. So now we have a list of dictionaries, which I believe is what we want. Does anyone see any potential issues here? Anything strange?
One thing I've ran into before is when you have a CSV file, if you put spaces after your commas, when it populates, like the number has a space in front of it, that could cause an issue.
Yeah, exactly. So let's say that this is just something we're getting. So we don't have any control over this. We can't change this. So what do we do?
You want to strip the white space.
Yeah. We're going to strip the white space. So is it strip? Is there a method called strip in Python? Trim?
Yeah.
I think so.
Strip. So let's see what this looks like. Dict has no object. Strip. So that's not going to work.
Can you access because that's trying to strip the actual dictionary. You want to strip the value of the dictionary.
Yeah,
So I don't know if you can access it that way.
right. Yeah. So this is going to be a little tricky because we need to do some additional processing. But what we can do is we can actually basically take it apart and then reassemble it. So we'll do C. So C is the dictionary. So C, and then what is the key we have here? Country. Let's do. B, C. This is a little crowded here, but and then is that what it is? Country cost. Sorry. So cost is going to be C cost, but we want to dot strip. So let's see what that looks like.
Could you take this opportunity to typecast it as an int?
Yeah,
While we're here.
that would be a great idea because ultimately we don't want a string. So everything we read from a CSV file is going to be a string, right? Reading from a file, so it doesn't matter whatever it is or whatever you think it is, it's just going to be a string when you read it. So we're going to have to cast
We
it.
make a strip method.
Yeah, so we're gonna, so this is a common case where you get, data and it's just not usable as it is. So we not only do we have to process this to get rid of some useless white space, but we have to cast it. So okay. So now we have a list of dictionaries and we've converted this from an invalid string to a valid int. Okay, so now we have this contents and we need to assign this to the desk dict. So okay, let me see. So let's run this real quick. And let's take a look at, we're calling t.read from file. So how do we want to handle this? So we create an instance. And then do we want to have to call this method? Do we want every single instance have to be responsible for creating this dictionary? So I would say no. We don't want to do that. One, we're giving an instance responsibility that should really just belong to the class, and two, we are redoing the same work over and over and over again. So I think what we should do here is to self dot desk dict equals, and we will call, this is one potential solution. I'm going to set this equal to none by default and read from file. What I'm going to do is just have a conditional. So if cls dot desk dict is none, and we're going to do all this. And that's basically it. So let's do T. Yes. So that is not what I want to do. So what did I do wrong here?
you tried to assign it, you kind of treated it as an instance variable instead of a class variable.
Yeah, so there's a couple things I did wrong actually. So one of them is I'm kind of, I'm assigning this here, and I'm assigning this to the return value from this function. And what does this function return?
Nothing.
Yeah, so it returns nothing, and I'm assigning this, even though I'm kind of like creating this. So I call this function. This class.destIct gets modified, and then I immediately, as soon as the function finishes executing, this returns none, so I overwrite it with none. So that's bad for several reasons. So in the init, you don't just have to assign things. You can actually kind of run. You can run functions. So I'm just gonna I want to run this function. So now, if I look at this, and if I create another instance, same thing. And let me
So is essentially what's happening there. The first time you create an instance of the travel package, it's populating that class variable, and then every other instance will see that and won't have to do anything.
Yeah. Yeah. This is one way of handling that. Okay, so now we have, so that was kind of, in some ways, that was the hardest part of what we have to do. So we have this travel package, we have this desk dictionary, which is belongs to the class now. So when we create an instance, the first instance is special. So the first instance, every instance when it gets created is going to run this function, but the first one, the desk dict will be none, and so we'll read the contents and populate that. And then every following instance, it's just going to do nothing. Okay. So we've got that. So now we're gonna have to get the user budget. So let's go ahead and look at our, so get user budget. So we need to get the input. So.
Quick question about the class variable. What if later on something changes in that and we want to update the class variable? Do we just call that method? I'm a little bit lost on how we would update it with that method.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So you have to think about different use cases. So what are we doing here? In this case, we're kind of assuming that this data is never going to change. Is that realistic? Well, it kind of depends on whatever you're doing. But I would say, if this were an actual an actual production application, you would be getting this dynamically. This would probably be being updated at random intervals, maybe even on the minute or on the second or something like that. So you'd probably be reading this information in every time anyway, or reading it from a database or from some API, and you'll get JSON back, something like that. Yeah, so there are a lot of different possibilities, but yeah, unfortunately, this is just to kind of keep things simple. All right, so we've got the budget, so we need to get input. So okay, so we're going to get the budget, and then we need to validate the input. So let's say, I think, again, to keep it simple, let's go with ints for the user budget. So you can do something, we'll just do a simple check. We'll see if it's not a negative number. So if budget is less than or equal to 0, what do you want to do? Let's throw, how can I raise an exception? Let's do Tressa. How can I raise an exception?
Hold on one sec. For the exceptions, wouldn't you do like a try and an accept? So you would try something, and then
Okay.
if that didn't work, you would follow it with the exception.
Okay, so that's good. So that's more handling an exception. So what I want to do here is not handle an exception that may occur, somewhere. I want to raise an exception. So I want to create that.
Use those
Right.
words, raise exception.
Yeah, raise, not as a capital exception.
Yeah, capital exception, and it takes,
So why is exception capital?
it's a class.
Yeah, it's a class. We're going to create an instance basically of the exception class, and we can pass it, an argument, which is a string. So do something like something like that, else self.user budget equals. Okay. So we're gonna get input, we're gonna validate it, and then we're gonna assign this to the instance variable. Okay, and then filter destination based on budget. Any ideas here?
So we need to maybe create a new list,
Okay,
look through the dictionary and return a list that meets those criteria.
okay. So bonus points if someone can tell me how to do this using a list comprehension.
Be like I for I in our list if that would be the cost list cost less than or equal to budget.
Yeah, you're breaking up there, but something like that. Let's do self.filtered. All right. I'm being, very bad about testing, but trying to do this quickly. So yes, so let's assume that this works. We'll see.
You have an S on there.
How's
That's
that?
not, when you initialize filtered destinations, it's not
Oh.
plural.
Thank you. Okay. So filtered, is this misspelled? Yes.
I got a quick question, hopefully. I'm not familiar with the raise exception. Will that reprompt the user for additional input?
No,
Like-
it will. So if you raise an exception, basically it's going to throw an error and then the program will stop executing. If you were consuming this, you might want to handle that. So,
Okay.
so this is more of a notional thing. You might not want to be that extreme. Probably want to like reprompt, but
Okay, thanks.
I also have a question.
Yeah.
Isn't budget right now currently a string when we get it from the user?
that is a great question. Any thoughts?
I think it is.
How's that?
Like it is, yeah.
Yeah.
Or just cast it as an int.
Okay, good. Good catch. So just like reading from CSVs, reading input, it's just going to be a string. So we'll try this. This is also going to kind of by default do some other error handling, which we might want to actually. So let's go ahead and try handling this actually. So what will happen if I pass in, you know, the string apple?
It's not going to be able to cast it to an integer.
Right, and what will happen?
Throw a type error.
Yeah, so that may be fine, but let's say we don't want to do that. We want to handle that exception and raise our own exception. You could do something like that. So try this and then accept. This, you know, maybe bad practice here, but raise. Because you raise another exception. You can actually do something like this. So here's an example of if we do this and it doesn't work, an exception will be raised. But let's say we want to handle that exception because we don't really want that default behavior. We want to do something else. So we could, you know, raise our own exception, which is a different one. You could somehow process it. We could reprompt the user. We could do anything there. Okay. So we're going to get the user budget, and now it should be an integer. We're going to filter it, and then we're going to display the filtered destinations. So I'm just going to do
and we make that string must pass in a non-negative integer.
right here.
Yes.
Yeah, except that so these are kind of two different checks. So this is making sure that it's convertible to an integer, and a negative number would be convertible into an integer. And then here we're specifically checking the actual value of the number.
Okay.
So yeah, so these are actually two different kind of checks. And these are just meant to be stand-ins for any kind of user validation you might want to do. So I'm just going to print out, yeah, just to keep this simple, self.filtered destinations. Okay, we could obviously make this prettier, but that'll be fine. And then get user destination. Again, we're going to follow the same pattern. So I'm going to do, I'll keep this simple. Let's see. What is this? And then for a validation, we'll do if dest in. How do we handle this? So we have our filtered destinations is a list of dictionaries, right?
You could just print a destination for each dictionary in the list rather than printing the dictionaries.
True.
List.
Yeah, so that's true. So yeah, I'm being lazy here. But yeah, we could definitely print this out better. But the issue still stands where you know, the user has to choose a destination and they can enter whatever they want. So I want to make sure that
if destination not in the dictionary.
Right, but the question is, how do I check that? Because I have a list of dictionaries.
Use list comprehension here.
Oh, okay. It's music to my ears, list comprehension. So what do I want this to be ultimately?
If destination in dictionary, not in dictionary.
So I want this to be a list of countries, right? A list of countries that are or, so this would be like France, Italy, whatever, right? Every country that's made it through the filter. But I have a list of dictionaries. So I'm gonna have to do,
Need the key value, correct?
yeah. So we're gonna have to do D4D in self dot filtered destination. This should probably be a plural, but whatever. Okay. So what is D gonna be here?
The whole dictionary.
Yes, it's going to be a dictionary. So I don't want the whole dictionary. I want the I think we're using country, right? Yeah.
We could use the read key, I guess, module to detect a key press and make it easier for the user to select instead of having to type out the whole country.
Yes. Yeah. There's lots of things. I'm trying to keep this simple, but yes. Yeah. There's a whole bunch of things, and feel free to play around with it. But yeah. Destination. So we have. So what do we want to do with this destination value? Well, I'll just go ahead and say we're probably going to want to store this as an instance variable. Dest else. I'm just going to raise another exception. Okay, and I'm just going to leave this here, so I'm not going to define it up here, although I probably should, but just to show that you don't have to. So we're going to basically create this new instance variable here. And then print confirmation message, print you that. Make this formatted string. All right, so let's see if this works real quick. So we're reading from the file automatically, and we're gonna have to somehow run all this stuff, right? So we could, again, we could make the caller responsible for all that, but I'm going to create kind of a main method. I'll call it main runner method. So self dot get user budget. So we're going to get user budget, and then we're going to filter the destinations based on the budget, and we're going to self dot display filter destinations, get user destination, and then print confirmation. We could call this here. Let's see if that works. What is your budget? 1200. Choose a destination. Japan. Okay. So you do more testing. Another thing we could also do is, if we just want this to run kind of automatically, we could call main here. We could call self.main. It just depends on if we want, how we want this to be used. We could do this. So this works. And if I do something that I'm not supposed to, so notice that the default exception is to raise the built-in, but I kind of handled that and then I overrode it. But the exception was passed in an integer. So let's do another one. I entered invalid destination and I get an exception, not a valid choice. So yeah. So I just want to kind of go through the process of you get some requirements, you plan it out, and then if you have everything planned, the more you plan out, the easier it is to implement this stuff. It's very easy if you just get, okay, write a class that does some stuff, and then you start coding. It's very easy to paint yourself into a corner and you get lost and you don't know what to do. Whereas if you have it kind of planned out, even though plans change, and as you do things, you realize, oh, I should do this differently. There's still a basic reference for you to look at. And it just becomes a lot easier to keep track of where you are and what you're doing. Okay, any questions about that?
I had a quick question. During the user budget section, you mentioned like the try and where was it?
Yeah.
You mentioned something really quickly, like that doing that, the try and accept a couple of times is bad practice. Could you quickly talk about why you mentioned that?
Yeah, so what I'm doing is I'm potentially raising an exception here and then catching it and then raising another exception. So it's just one of those things where it's not like you can't do it or it's not done, but it's just, you might want to think about redesigning this if you're like catching an exception and then raising an exception. There's nothing, logically wrong and it works.
So you're just saying that normally where you have the accept and the try and accept would be another executable code, like to rerun the method or something. And if you were doing it simply, you wouldn't do the try and accept, you would just do the straight raise exception. It's basically like your accept is the raise exception.
Sorry, can you say that last part again?
I think you could do like accept name error, accept type error, like you can specifically raise a specific.
Yeah, so you can handle, you can be more specific with your accept. So you could do, I don't know what this would be, value error maybe. But there are a whole bunch of specific subclasses, right? So subclasses of exception. So exception is a common base class for all non-exit exceptions. And there are a whole bunch of subclasses for specific things. And probably like, in the real world, you'll probably use a built-in subclass of exception rather than, using this very generic one. And then when you're more specific with your exceptions, you can handle specific exceptions in specific kinds of ways.
Just what I'm asking is, you're saying that's bad practice. Basically what you're doing is you're using accept to raise an exception. Is that what you're saying is the bad practice?
Right,
It's kind of like redundancy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying you could never do it or that there's never a use case for it, but it's one of those things like if you have 10 if-else statements, like maybe you want to think about approaching it differently. If you're raising exceptions and then catching them and then raising exceptions in the catch block, you might want to think about redesigning it. It's just like a code smell. Again, it works. It's fine, but it's, it should make you want to look twice.
I don't want to beat a dead horse, but so we want to be as specific as possible, right?
Right. So here, again, I don't want to get into all the details, but you could, create your own exception subclass if you wanted to. And then if you really had a truly like custom case, you can also just look up let's see. So there's the base exception, assertion error, attribute error, buffer error, lookup error. So there's all kinds of these, specific exceptions, subclasses. And so if you have, if you have something like this, you almost never want to just raise a general exception. You want to raise some specific thing. Like this would probably be value error, something like that.
So I kind of want to follow up with the try and accept also. So if you did try and accept instead of raise exception, wouldn't you put the value error next to the accept and then do a print statement of the must pass an integer instead of raising an exception? Couldn't you do that?
Yeah, exactly. So you would do something like this, and then I'll accept value. I believe this is value error, but we'll see. Try again, and then we put some logic that retries. I'm not going to do that, but let's see if this works. So I'll do some nonsense. Let's see. What did I do here? Let me just do reference before assignment. Yeah, I would probably have to put the rest of this logic inside the. Let me try doing that. Just for simplicity's sake, I'm going to get rid of this for now. Try. So now let me try actually handling error. And then make this a print statement. All right, so we have must pass in. Let me just double check right here. So budget, what is your budget? I pass in some nonsense. Yeah, so this is not a value. I have to look this up. Let me just check. Python.
Would it be a type error?
Try that. Let's see.
So if you're using try and accept or you're using raise exception, is there a benefit to using one over the other? Is there like a speed component or?
Try accept. So they're two totally different things. One is creating an exception. So when you raise an exception, you're creating it. And when you use try accept, you're handling the exception.
Oh, okay. All right.
So here, there's a potential that an error could happen. So we're just handling that in our code. We're saying, we're writing this code and we're saying, hey, I want to convert input to an int, but I know that it's possible that this could cause an error. And I don't want to just exit my program automatically. I want to handle it gracefully. So I'll wrap it in a try except block. I don't know. Yeah. Okay, so sorry. Yeah, so we'd have to mess around with this, the main class as well, but so this did trigger. So this raised a value error, and then this printed must pass an integer. but I handled it and then kept calling everything else, so it kept going. So we have to change the logic, but yeah, this is the basic idea here. All right, I'll stop there.